slogans during the strike was the shame on you, and it's a sense I still have when I walk around campus, and I think to some extent part of the project in the book was to record what they were willing to do to force through this decision, and how they were willing to treat us, but also the costs they were willing to inflict on departments, faculty, undergraduates, the academic community, in order to prevent what was only a ask for a democratic voice for graduate students.
Well, you know, in a closed-door meeting with a graduate student in the fall of 2005, NYU's president, John Sexton, said that the union, the GSOC, was a virus that had to be eradicated from the face of the earth. And I think it's a really interesting phrase, and I want to take him at his word that he actually believes that. And I think it's interesting because it casts us as totally abject, right? It casts us as less than human, but also as sort of immaterial and microscopic in our kind of in the way in which he views us, or is able to view us. But on the other hand, I think it's a really interesting way to think about political interventions into the way that the university functions, because viruses are constantly adapting, right? They transform the things that they interact with in unforeseen and potentially unexpected ways. They're I think that they and they're totally irresistible. They're
Sure.
very difficult to kind of guard against. And the university's attempts to destroy this particular virus or vaccinate against it have at this point failed, because we're still here. And so I think it's interesting to think about the ways in which we have infected the university and where that infection might lead.
That's great.
Well, I also want to say, and you said this in your talk, that there's also a way that certain groups of people are also deemed threats to the social body in ways that are race, sex, and gender. And the whole idea of viral activism is something that was really prominent in queer activism in the 80s with ACT UP, and has been taken up in a lot of people of color and liberation movements. So I think that's something to kind of keep in mind in terms of this constant borrowing back and forth between the labor movement and other social movements. And we need to remember that, because I think there's a real ethical commitment to ensuring that all of these movements start to kind of consider, I don't mean that just on the labor side,
Sure.
but that social movements aren't so afraid of unions.
They were willing to call me an outsider. I was a student, I still spend a lot of hours on campus. I teach, I organize events, I order the catering, yet when I was expressing the wish to have a collective voice, when I was putting on the UAW signs, they were calling me an outsider. And I think that's my personal offense, and that's my personal sense of the shame on you.
I'd say it's the complete refusal of discussion and dialogue, the cloistering of the administration after they'd made their position from multiple constituencies. Of course, from the union, the refusal to negotiate whatsoever or even discuss the possibility of a contractor continuing the relationship. But Jesse Jackson came to campus, and Jesse Jackson requested an audience with, if not the president, then some top official, and was denied and shut down. That takes some guts. The undergraduates of NYU, who were overwhelmingly supportive of the strike, especially at the outset, organized independently a day of action to kind of put their voice into the dialogue where they felt like it had been marginalized before. They wrote a collective letter to President Sexton and tried to deliver it to him, and were denied. They weren't allowed into the office. They tried to deliver it collectively by screaming it through, through the library, which houses the administration office, and were completely stonewalled and never given an audience. So it was that just absolute sense of smugness and refusal to participate in what the university claims to be all about.
Almost out of time. Rana?
Mine was post the strike. When NYU refused to negotiate with the union, they formed an extra, like basically a student body organization called the House of Delegates to replace it. And we were in negotiations with them for over a year. And in the very last meeting, they had the gall to act like they'd never heard any of the things we were saying to them before, despite the strike, despite a paper trail that had gone on for a whole year. And that was really offensive to me. I can deal with being being told that I don't quite belong, but I can't deal with the idea that we hadn't made ourselves collectively abundantly clear over and over again.
We had a banner during the strike that said the future of academia is on the line, and I think that their response to the strike, firing 25 people, blacklisting them, was really an attack on that future. And their attack on GSOC was an attack on that future, which is why I'm really glad that we're still here.
That was great. Thank you, guys.
Yeah, thank you very
Thank
much.
That was fun. That's great.
What are you, Antonio or something?